with regard to the suicide, is it seriously contended by people on the pro-life side, as you are, that there are never circumstances in which a woman might be suicidal because of her pregnancy?
No, it is contended by people on the pro-life side, as I am, that there are never circumstances in which an abortion is treatment for suicide.
Well, can I offer you a potential example? This is hypothetical, obviously, where a woman has been brutally raped and is pregnant as a consequence of the rape, and is desperately traumatized by the rape, and further traumatized and is suicidal at the thought of bringing to full of her body being used to bring to finality her pregnancy, and is suicidal on that account. You can see that there will be circumstances in which a woman would be suicidal in such circumstances. Are you saying this shouldn't be permitted?
I'm saying that we have in this country some of the best psychiatrists in the world. I'm saying there are ways to treat that situation that are both compassionate and humane, and that do not punish the unborn child for a crime committed by its father. Firstly. Secondly, I'm saying this is the bit in the debate where people on my side are supposed to squirm and say, oh, it's terrible and we're compassionate. I don't believe that it is possible ethically to say that you can carve out a situation in ethics and say there is this circumstance where a child can be punished for a crime committed by the father of that child. I don't think that's something that you can do.
You can put it that way too, but you can also say that you can conceive of circumstances where a woman would be suicidal at the thought of bringing to full to finality a pregnancy brought about by really violent, awful rape.
And you can conceive,
and you're saying in such circumstances, too bad.
I'm saying you can also conceive of a circumstance where a woman might be suicidal on the basis that she finds herself pregnant and her partner is not around or has left her. And is that any more or less grieving than the violent rape which you describe? By the way, this is an emotive debate, Vincent.
No, because in the circumstance that you allude to, it wouldn't be because of her pregnancy. It probably would be because of the breakup of the relationship that might cause it. But in the circumstances where, for instance, she was suicidal as a consequence of the thought of bearing this her violent rapist child.
Well, there are two things I'd say. First of all, just as abortion is not a cure for suicide, it is tragically not a cure for having been raped. That is a trauma that any woman is. I didn't say you said it. I didn't say you said it. But you seem to be. It's not a diversion, Vincent. You have just said that I am somehow, that the people on my side are somehow heartless for saying that a woman who has been grievously raped and seeks an abortion shouldn't get it. What I'm saying to you is that abortion is not a cure for suicide. Abortion is not a cure for having raped. Abortion is a medical procedure which has one goal.
Pregnancy is a daunting condition, even when it's something that you want, and giving birth is extremely daunting, even when it's something that you really want and long for. And to be in a circumstance where you're a child being forced to bear the child of a rapist, it's just unspeakable. And I find it a bit disturbing, the language that John was using there when he said we're supposed to squirm and feel compassionate, and then he kind of went on to say, well, actually we don't. I mean, that just isn't an appropriate response to a situation where a woman has experienced a violation and is seeking to find somewhere where she can alleviate the effects of that. And abortion is, in that circumstance, the availability of abortion is, in that circumstance, an extreme comfort to women. And I don't think that most people would think that that is wrong. In fact, the majority of Irish people have said in polls which have been held since the X case that they do support the right of a woman to have an abortion in the case of rape or incest, which is another horrific rape situation in which women and children may become pregnant against their will and against their deepest desires.
First of all, just because somebody says something in a poll doesn't mean that they're right. Secondly, if we want to have a debate about compassion and language and the way we conduct this debate, then conducting it in a way that says, unless you support the right of a woman to have an abortion if she's been raped, is an act that's not compassionate, I don't think is helpful.
There's a number of difficult questions, I think, raised throughout the meeting today. For example, what do you do in the case of an emergency? Do you still seek the opinion of two doctors? Rona Mahoney was asked that, and she said, well, if a woman is dying, no, I'm going to do whatever needs to be done to save that woman's life. But then we had Mary McCaffrey, who was representing the smaller hospitals, and she said, I think you're going to need to get the opinion of at least two doctors particularly at the beginning. So again, even amongst the professionals,
about to die. There's no beginning there.
I think she meant at the beginning of this whole process, of this whole system having been introduced. That was my understanding of what she was saying. But again, amongst the professionals that we heard today, what really struck me was amongst all the professionals across all the different disciplines, there was disagreement, and lots of disagreement on lots of the key issues. I think the government's going to have a big problem with it.
I think this is going to cause more problems for the government, and Fine Gael in particular.
Yeah.
But it is worth remembering, though, that we revisited the issue of suicide in the 1992 and again in 2002 referendums, where the people were asked to decide if they wanted suicide to be removed as a grounds for potentially having an abortion, and the people voted that that should not be removed and that we should continue to have suicide as a grounds there. And
in that referendum, the Fine Gael party campaigned for a no vote, telling the people that the referendum might be subject to judicial challenge, and that if we wanted to restrict abortion access as related to suicide, legislation was a better way to go about it. So you can't say, you can't look at a campaign and say, well, here was the result and let's forget why people voted. When we have other referendum results, we bring in the Europeans to do polls and tell us why we voted. Nothing ever happened in that case, but we do know that Enda Kenny was one of the people in that party who now says he's opposed to abortion, telling us to vote no because legislation was a better way to restrict access. So I don't think, Susan, you can make the case that that referendum was determinative of anything very much, except that possibly we need another one.
Well, possibly we do need another one, because I'm not so sure that the legislation that they're going to be able to bring in this case is going to cover all situations.
Yeah. One of the situations is where a woman is pregnant and the fetus has no possibility of survival outside the womb, and should termination be permitted in those circumstances. And Arlette, you had just that experience.
Yeah, just a little under a year ago. We found out at 12 weeks that our baby was non-viable. She had a fatal condition, and we were given 0% chance that she'd survive. Automatically I assumed that they would have ended the pregnancy there and then, but it was only then I found out that I had to travel over to Liverpool to seek a termination with my parents and my husband. And since then, I suppose the outrage of just having to do that, it was so unfair. The baby was planned, very wanted. The baby didn't have special needs or disability. It was a non-viable pregnancy. She was never going to survive. So coming back, the group that we have formed in TFMR Ireland, it's basically, there's about 100 couples, 100 families in it now, who've all experienced the exact same scenario. Before that, we're the first support group. Before that, it wasn't heard of very often. But even in the last 2 weeks over Christmas, we have had another 2 families that have had to go through the whole termination for fatal abnormalities.
I'll just ask you, what were you told at the time? Did you seek a termination here in Ireland?
Well, when we discovered that the baby had the fatal condition, the obstetrician, I kind of looked at her and said, what next? As in, I assumed they'd end the pregnancy. If it was non-viable, I was only 12 weeks pregnant. I had 2 sons at home, my husband. There was no way I could continue for another 28 weeks, knowing that there was absolutely no chance for a little baby to be born at the end of it. So it was the obstetrician, the midwife, they were the ones that told me, unfortunately, not in this jurisdiction, you'll have to travel. So we made the heartbreaking decision to travel and end the pregnancy.
Would it have been horrific for you to have born the child for the full 9 months?
Oh God, yeah, definitely. Firstly, the baby, the baby could have lived for like 10 minutes and struggled. I didn't want to do that to the baby. I didn't want to do it to my 2 sons, definitely. Myself and my husband, there was just, I wasn't mentally able to continue with a pregnancy that was definitely 100% not going to survive. I suppose I would have had to leave work. I would have, probably had to lock myself in a room for the whole period of the time. There was never any discussion. If we'd been given a 1% chance that the baby could survive, we would have gone ahead with the pregnancy. But it was a definite 0%, and that was confirmed by at least 3 medical professionals.
How did you feel about going to Liverpool for the termination?
Awful, absolutely. You know, I was treated so well in the hospital in Dublin. I have all my family, my friends, my husband, my kids, you know, here in Dublin, and to have the worst news possible. Like, this was a very much wanted pregnancy. It was very planned. So to be told your baby's going to die is the worst news ever. But then on top of that, to be told you have to go and travel to seek the medical treatment that you desperately need. I was fuming, absolutely so angry. You know, I could accept that bad things happen and that babies, you know, sometimes don't survive, and bad things happen all the time, but to have your country totally turn their back on you and send you off to another country, thank God for England at the time, you know, at the time. They were very kind to us.
How did you feel after the termination?
Angry, very angry. I did get counselling for both bereavement and having the termination, but very, very angry that I had to travel. I'm very much at peace with my decision. I know I made the right decision, and my whole family together, we know we made the right decision. I'm still very much at peace with my decision. There's people in our group that have had terminations for these specific reasons 10 years ago, and they're still convinced they did the right thing. I suppose really it's just the anger that this is happening to women, to families, to couples every week here in Ireland. Someone tomorrow is going to go in and get their very happy scan, and it's going to turn into a horrible diagnosis, and they're going to have to travel. It's so unfair. It's so cruel. When you're going through such a horrible time, it's so cruel to add this onto it. So basically that's what our campaign is trying to get, to have terminations legal when you have a fatal abnormality.
I understand you sought an opportunity to present your case before the Oireachtas committee, but they said
we asked, it
wasn't relevant.
Well, we thought, considering we're the only campaigning group that have actually full experience of having a termination, you know, like obviously the medics, the lawyers and all that, we've been through it, we've been there, we've done it. We just assumed, you know, we'd be very likely to go in and speak as, you know, witnesses that can give full witnesses exactly what happened. So we were very disappointed. We did ask a numerous amount of TDs and politicians, could we speak? But no, it didn't happen.
But of course it's not really relevant to the issue being discussed by the Oireachtas committee, because the proposed changes to legislation will not encompass these circumstances.
Yeah, that's very true, Vincent. But when we went public with our story to FMR last April, we were in contact with the government a lot, all the TDs, and they had said that they will look at the issue once the expert group came back with their report. We've email upon email with all the politicians. We met James Riley. We went into the government, met James Riley. Each and every one of them said, we will deal with this once the expert group come back.
Did James Riley tell you this?
Yes, he did, yeah.
What we're looking for at the moment is clarification of the Supreme Court ruling in the X case, and you could have legislation that spoke about the viability of the fetus as being a determining characteristic as to whether the pregnancy would go on, and that wouldn't necessarily require the Constitution to be changed. However, it still means that women who had been raped or subjected to incest would not be covered.
Utmost sympathy for what Arlette went through, but the problem is this. When we talk about non-viable or incompatible with life, what do we mean? Do we mean 10 minutes after birth? Do we mean 6 months? Do we mean 6 years? There are families out there in this country who are living right now with children who they know will die before they reach the age of 10, before they go to school. And that's a horrifying situation, and some of them may not want to live with that. But I mean, there's a point at which we have to draw a line and say, is this an issue of abortion, or is it an issue of euthanasia and or mercy killing? And that's where the real ethical problem, as I'm sure you appreciate, comes in.
Yeah, just to answer you there, John, these are fatal conditions. There can be different extremities of, you know, like Edwards syndrome, but Edwards syndrome can come along with a heart that's not fully functioning, kidneys that aren't there, anencephaly. There's no brain, there's no skull, there's absolutely no chance. They're very, very specific, fatal diagnosis, and you can get them by getting the tests, getting the results. You know, you say, what's life, like 10 minutes? That should be the choice of the family. Do they want their child to be born for 10 minutes, or do they want to? It's done with compassion.
But why
In
is
our
it 6 years
circumstances,
old?
it's done with
It's
compassion.
somewhat different to the issues that we discussed, but thank you very much for